call Senior Constable?
Sergeant, yeah.
Sergeant Chris Hand, Your Honour.
Thank you. And Sergeant, before you give your evidence, do you promise to tell the truth to the court?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sergeant, can I ask you to restate your full name?
Christopher Philip Hand.
And you said that your current rank is a sergeant.
Yes, that's right.
Where are you currently stationed?
Territory Intelligence Division in Darwin.
In Darwin. Now, I'm not going to take them to them, but you've provided a number of sworn or affirmed statements in these proceedings.
Yes, that's right.
On the 14th of November, you participated in a recorded interview.
Yes.
Your Honour, for the record, that's 7-52. And attached or annexed to that recorded statement was one exhibit.
Yes.
And that was a running sheet.
Yes, that's right.
That has the same document ID number. You then participated in a further recorded statement, gave a further recorded statement on the 17th of December 2019.
Yes, that's right.
And, Your Honour, that's at 7-53. You were also called and gave sworn evidence at the criminal trial.
Yes.
Constable Rolf's criminal trial.
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honour, that's at 7-53 capital A. And finally, a couple of weeks ago, on the 1st of September 2022, you gave a written statement.
Yes, that's right.
And that written statement deals with some broader issues, community policing and the like.
That's correct.
And that's at 7-53 double capital A. You graduated from the Northern Territory Police Forces College in July of 1995.
December 1995. I started in July 95.
And when you graduated in December of 1995, you were stationed in Alice Springs for a time.
Yes, that's correct.
You then went out to Moondamoo in 1997 or thereabouts.
Yes, that's right.
Following that, you spent some time in Darwin.
Between mid-97 and late 99, I transferred to Darwin to work general duties.
And in or around September of 2001, you moved down to Mataranka.
Yes, that's correct.
And Mataranka isn't a remote community, but it's getting remote, is that right?
Yeah, it's classed as a bush police station, and we do have, back then there was at least 2 Indigenous communities that we serviced, and then an Indigenous camp that was just outside of Mataranka that we serviced.
And those communities were Minyeri, or what used to be Hodgson River Downs Station?
Hodgson Downs, yes.
Jilpingan.
Yes.
And Mulgan Camp.
That's correct.
You in fact became the OIC there after a time.
Yes, I did.
You then moved to Katherine.
Yes.
Back up to Darwin.
That's correct, yes.
And eventually went into relieving in some of the remote communities in the southern region, is that correct?
Yes, yes. And I also did a short 6-week stint in Port Keats a few years ago as well, while I was in Darwin.
I'll come back to your time in the remote communities.
Yes.
But if we go back to December 1995 when you commenced as a police officer, how old were you?
I started a week before my 22nd birthday.
And where were you from?
Adelaide, South Australia.
Okay. And had you done anything beforehand, or?
I was working. Before I started in the police. I was working as a manager at a McDonald's store in Adelaide.
In your work as a manager at McDonald's or otherwise, did you have much interaction with Aboriginal people?
Not really, no.
What was the overall structure of the police college course?
So there was there were 2 courses that went through. When I went through each, I think there was about 27, 28 recruits in each squad, as they were called. And so there was a senior officer, either a sergeant or a senior constable, as the course coordinator. and then they would conduct some lectures, or they would have other police officers coming in to conduct lectures as part of the course.
Can you recall receiving any training regarding Indigenous people or cultural competency?
We did have a block of cultural awareness training, and I don't remember when that was during that course, but I do remember that had a local Indigenous woman from Darwin come and give us a lecture on cultural issues and sensitivities when dealing with Indigenous people.
And would that have been a single lecture?
Yes.
Over the course of an entire day or an hour, can you remember?
I think it was a best part of a whole day.
What about in the years since? Have you had any ongoing training around working with Indigenous people, cultural competency?
Not really. It's more on-the-job training and just speaking with Indigenous people that you come across, and also working with Aboriginal community police officers and learning from them.
I want to come back to your on-the-job training in just a moment, but if I can turn to use of force training, can you remember at a very general level what the instruction was?
Yes, so there was use of force encompassing the firearms training as well as defensive tactics training, which was separate to the firearms training. And there was instruction on and going through the theory with regards to Section 2728 of the Criminal Code and use of force policy, which was in place during that time in the police force.
And just for the sake of the record, Sections 27 and 28 of the Criminal Code deal with defensive conduct.
Yes, yes.
And they're generally applicable. They apply to police officers and civilians alike.
That's right, yes.
At the time, were you introduced to, this is a bit of a buzzword, but the Northern Territory Police Force's operational safety philosophy?
Yes, I can't remember what it was called back then, but it's had several iterations as my career has progressed. So I can't remember what it was called back then, but generally speaking, that's what it's referring to. Yes.
Can you remember what you were taught the primary objective of your interactions should be if they were going to involve force?
Just to use the least amount of force possible and to ensure that it's proportionate and with what you're trying to achieve, and also what level of offending or the person you are you're interacting with.
And what about the role, if any, of communication in use of force scenarios?
Yeah, so communication is quite vital in such scenarios, and just ongoing verbal communication using, as we call it, dynamic verbal commands. Can
I ask you quickly about your training about edged weapons? And when I say edged weapons, I don't mean for use by the police. I mean training regarding situations where persons of interest or offenders are armed with edged weapons. Mm-hmm. Can you recall what your training was in December 1995 or thereabouts?
It was to do with when an offender's armed with a knife, and there's a certain level of distance that you need to create to have a suitable reaction, because someone can come at you with a knife quite quickly, not throw it at you, but run at you, and just it's called a reactionary gap. And to create, if you can't create that reactionary gap or find suitable cover, like an object or a wall or something like that, that can be used as cover.
And what, if anything else, were you taught to do other than create the reactionary gap when presented with an edged weapon?
Again, use the verbal commands, dynamic verbal commands to obviously tell the person to drop the weapon and identify yourself as a police officer if they don't already know.
Was there a relationship between the presentation of an edged weapon and a firearm, the police firearm?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Were you taught to do anything with your firearm, your Glock?
Well, there was back when I was doing the training, there was a phrase that was used of knife equals gun, and what that means is you can draw your firearm if you deem it necessary, but it doesn't mean that you have to draw your firearm. But you do have that option, because a knife can obviously be a lethal weapon if that person is in close proximity to you.
So you understood knife equals gun to mean you had a discretion to draw your gun? But
Yes, it doesn't automatically mean you draw your firearm if you see an edged weapon.
can you remember that phrase, knife equals gun, actually being used during police training?
It was used by the trainers when I was going through recruit training, yes.
Did you hear other officers use the phrase from time to time during your early career as a police officer?
During our requalifications, it was used on occasions, yes.
By whom?
Instructors.
Okay. So, going back to those early days in Alice Springs, you were just about to turn 22 years old, I think.
Yes.
Um,
Well, sorry, I was 22 in Alice Springs, so I turned 22 a week into my training.
so you were 22 by the time you were on the job in Alice Springs?
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of duties were you performing in Alice Springs in the very, very early days?
So it was a range of duties, so we called it general duties, but we were swapped through front counter, communications. Back then, the Alice Springs Police Station ran their communications, so radios out and answering phones out of the police station, and working in the watch house as well as frontline general duties in a marked police vehicle.
Can you remember what the average age was of the
Um,
Springs Police Station generally? Would you have been one of the younger members?
No, there were people younger than me. I seem to recall we had maybe an 18 or 19-year-old in recruit training. But there's also some older people as well. But generally speaking, the older people who had families were allowed to stay in Darwin, and the younger probationary constables came to Alice Springs.
I think you said that when you went through the college there were two squads of 27 or thereabouts, so a little over 50.
Yes.
Can you recall how many of them ended up stationed to Alice Springs?
So it was about, out of the double squad, there was approximately 33 people. 33 of us came down to Alice Springs all at once.
When you were called out to jobs, frontline jobs, did you go alone, with a partner, with a number of people?
No, so you're generally partnered with a senior police officer, usually a first class or senior constable, and on occasions there was a vehicle of 3 police officers.
Those senior constables, would they supervise you or?
Yeah, so they were called your senior partner. The supervisor is generally the patrol group sergeant.
Would they provide advice or instruction or?
Yeah, so it's during recruit training, you get taught the theory and legislation and policy, and once you get out on the road, as we call it, then it's when you're on the job training and you're putting all that learnt theory into practice and the policy into practice, and the job of the senior partner was to guide and mentor the probationary constable and there was usually a book that had to be filled out with core competencies to allow you to come off probation.
And they would fill that book in, they would assess and report back on.
Yes, so they had different sections. I still believe there's something similar in existence nowadays, but basic file preparation, prosecution file preparation, statement taking, electronic record of interviews, exhibit handling, that type of thing.
Would they provide any guidance to you on general interaction with the people you were policing?
Yeah, so one thing you really can't get taught in recruit training is how to talk to people. And again, going back to when I was in recruit training, so things may have changed in the last 27 years. But the senior, you take cues off your senior partner on how to talk to people, and then you can put that into practice yourself.
And back in December of 1995, when we say people, the overwhelming majority of them would have been Aboriginal people, is that right?
Yes, but you also, using your verbal communication skills to talk to all sorts of people, victims of crime and offenders, but predominantly they are Indigenous people.
Would the senior partners provide any guidance regarding communicating with local Aboriginal people?
Yeah, so you took cues off them and watched how they interacted with them and how they spoke to the local Indigenous people, and whether they were intoxicated or sober. Obviously, there was a different way of communicating, and I learnt quite a lot from my senior partners. I had a wide variety of senior partners over a period of a few months.
What kind of things did they teach you about speaking to Aboriginal people?
Just being respectful, and they've got a different. Sometimes it depends where you are in the Northern Territory. Might be like a pidgin English type dialect, and just a different way of speaking to them. And if they're intoxicated, you don't want to talk down to people, but get on their level and get out of a vehicle, rather than if there's a group of people sitting down, talking story, or sitting in a group, and rather than stay in the vehicle and say, "Oh, come over here." You get out your car and go and interact with them and talk with them and find out just what they're doing and how their day's going, things like that.
You mentioned a moment ago that one of the roles of the senior partner was to, I suppose, audit your performance in those early months and fill out the book. And you mentioned that some of the things that they would assess were file preparation, EROIs, I'm assuming use of force.
Yes. So how you effect an arrest, and obviously make sure it's a lawful arrest.
As best you can recall, was one of the assessment criteria, or did one of the assessment criteria involve respectful communication?
Not that I can remember, no.
As best you can recall, did one of the assessment criteria involve interaction with Indigenous people, cultural competency?
Not that I can remember, no.
Was it a bit of a culture shock as a 22-year-old from Adelaide who worked in McDonald's?
Yeah, it was for me and for a lot of people. There were some local Territorians from Darwin and Tennant Creek. But yeah, for me personally, just moving to Darwin was enough of a culture shock with weather, and going from a winter's day in Adelaide and arriving in Darwin on it was a nice dry season day, but it was hot for me.
Was there any formal debriefing for young police officers who just started policing in Alice Springs who might be experiencing some culture shock or struggling to adjust?
Not that I can remember. We all kept to ourselves. We were all really good friends because we were in police training together. So we'd socialise with each other, go to the police club.
Did people ever talk about feeling exhausted or even traumatised by the work that they were doing?
No, we were all really, really excited about being police officers. So no, we're all, really happy to go to work every day, and every day was a new day and new jobs, and a lot of us even wanted to go out bush. There was, I think there was a lineup of people wanting to experience working in a remote community.
Do you think that's changed over time?
Yes, it has. Remote communities as a police officer, or even teacher or a nurse, isn't for everybody. It's a lifestyle choice. Obviously, the remoteness can be an issue for some people. Lack of services or shops can be an issue for some people, but also for speaking about police officers, with if they've got families with children that need to go to middle school or a high school, remote community policing is probably not the best for them.
Just go back to the topic of supervision and supervision by senior partners. When we had a conversation the other day, preparing for today, you said something I wrote down. It was, we were very lucky in that era.
Yes, we were. There was a lot of senior, what I would call senior police officers, so first class and senior constables, that had been in the NT Police for anywhere between 4 to 10 years, and they had a lot of wealth of experience that they were able to impart on all their the 33 junior police officers that went down.
Do I take it the flip side of that is that over time the constabulary in Alice Springs might have become more junior?
Well, at that point in time, there were 33 probationary constables all at once that came to Alice Springs, so it was quite a junior, considered to be the workforce. The police officers didn't have that much experience, but we were lucky where we had the ability to look up to those senior patrol, senior members that we call them.
While you were policing in Alice Springs, apart from the involvements that you were having with Aboriginal people as a police officer, were you interacting with Aboriginal people in another context, socially, or?
Playing sport. There was a police rugby team and AFL teams, so a lot of guys played AFL or rugby, and playing with and against Indigenous people.
Do you think it's important for a police officer who's going to police in a community that's, if not overwhelmingly, then substantially populated by Aboriginal people, that they have a balanced set of interactions with Aboriginal?
Oh, definitely. And even going to a licensed premises and interacting with them there.
Having a beer.
Yeah.
Now, your evidence was that you moved to Yuendamu in July of 1997, I think.
Yes.
Why'd you go?
I was one of those probationary constables that was knocking down the door of the OIC, wanting to experience something different than Alice Springs, and just to see a bit more of the a kid from South Australia, just want to see a bit more of the countryside, and to go to places that other people would not ordinarily visit, off the beaten track, not tourist destinations, that sort of thing. And that type of police work appealed greatly to me.
When you say that type of police work, what do you mean?
Just community policing, getting to know people, finding out a bit about the Indigenous culture.
And now, when you moved there, you were relieving for the first few months, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, but you decided to stay on.
Yes, I applied for a permanent position and won that later on in '97.
When you started as a police officer in Yuendamu, was there any induction to community policing or to the community of Yuendamu?
So back then it was the station was made up of a sergeant, 2 constables and an Aboriginal community police officer. And
Just pause you there. What was his name?
He's passed away, so I'll just call him Jabberula or Mr. Curtis. He's Derek Williams's uncle.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yep. Sorry, what was the question again?
Induction.
Oh, yes. So the sergeant generally was the one to show you the ropes of the community and introduce you to the stakeholders, so the clinic, shopkeepers, the town clerk. We had them back then, and the ACPO, Jabberula. He'd take you around to all the show you the cultural sites where you can't go, and give you a quick rundown of what not to do and what to do and those types of things.
Can you recall what some of the do's and don'ts were?
Well, there's in all communities there's a men's area and a women's area. Obviously, you can't go to a women's area. And men's area, if there's ceremony on, you stay away from that. If there's a men's initiation going on, that type of thing, stay away from that. But he also showed us the cultural sites that we could, rock art and that type of thing, that once we got to know him, myself and another police officer I was there with, he was able to show us, he wanted to show us his country, showed us where he was born and things like that.
During that introduction, as he was showing you around the community, was he also introducing you to people?
Yeah, so the community elders, both male and female, introduced us to them and to his family. He had 2 families. He had a family in Yuendamu and a family at Niripi.
Did he say why he was introducing you to the elders?
From what I can remember, it was more of a, these are the senior people in the community, so if you have a problem, if he's not here, and you see them, and you have an issue, then you can ask them and they'll try and point you in the right direction.
Do you think community policing is different to policing in an urban centre?
Very much so.
How so?
So on a community, an Aboriginal community, you get to know the people, the different family groups. You get to know their problems, what issues they're having, and problems with their children. But you also get to hear the good stuff. They tell you about their dreaming. A lot of them do. When I was there, were artists, and they love to tell you their dreaming and show you where they're from. And you don't get that level of interaction in an urban environment because you're going from job to job. You're getting dispatched to jobs constantly, and you don't get that opportunity to stop and smell the roses, I suppose. It's a good way of putting it.
Do you think that once you became a community police officer, you started experiencing different parts of Aboriginal life that you hadn't been exposed to in Alice Springs?
Well, definitely. Again, it's, Jabberoola took us to, showed us some places, some cultural spots that we needed to know about, because we, as to assist them, we had to protect them as well, from prying eyes from tourists and that sort of thing. But he would tell us the story and share with us his experiences as an Aboriginal community police officer, because he'd been before he was an ACPO, they were called trackers, and that's where they would look for lost people and find. He could tell you what animal had been in that path 3 days ago. So getting that level of interaction with him was, you wouldn't get that anywhere else.
These conversations that you were having with people, artists who tell you they're dreaming, just normal social interactions with members of the community, did you see them valuable to your work as a police officer?
I think so. It built up a rapport with them. They got to know us, we got to know them. So if they could feel that they could come to the police station if they had an issue, just because having said that, just because they've interacted with us, there might be other issues why they can't come and see the police, but we would see them down at the shop when we're out of uniform, because that's how we bought all our groceries from the. There was only one shop then, and my then wife at the time, she was working in the community as well. So she was working for Wallakalong Artists and Walpuri Media Organisation. So then I got to know the people that she worked with as a they didn't see me as a police officer if I wasn't in uniform, but they just see me as her husband.
You mentioned a moment ago that when Jabberoola introduced you to people, he said something like, these are people you can talk to if you need some information or need some help. What kind of things would you involve elders in that way?
Matters, cultural issues. Again, with people using, for instance, men's area to escape and hide from police. And you can go, if you, finding out if you need permission to go there, and usually they'll say, no, that's okay. You can, if they're trying to run from police, you can go there. They shouldn't be using a ceremonial area to hide from police. But also, if Jabberoola wasn't there, we could, if we're looking for somebody, they might know if a certain person is there. But also what, Jabberoola would be the person we'd speak to about men's business, and that's that type of thing when that was happening, because we needed to be aware when that was going on. But if he wasn't around, then if he was on holidays or something like that, then we could go to those senior elders, usually the men, because the women, because it's a very male-dominated society, and the women don't really like talking to male police officers, but they feel very a bit more comfortable with female police officers. But in my experience, we'd go to the men rather than the women.
If you're ever having trouble with someone in the community, let's say a young man of 22 who's getting into strife, is that something that you would raise with elders?
It depends what they're doing, but generally speaking, once they're an initiated man, becomes a little bit different with what they can do. They can, they're really good with the, again, talking 25 years ago, they were quite good with the youth, because back then we had issues with petrol sniffing, and that was when the Mount Theo program was being developed. So the elders would, before the court system would bail the youth offenders to Mount Theo, the elders stepped in and took them out there just to get them away from the community and try and break that cycle of sniffing.
Andrew Stojanovsky was running Mount
Yes.
Theo at the time.
Yes, yes.
And you didn't ask a young kid permission to go to Mount Theo. The elders just took them.
Yeah, that's right. They removed them from the community, obviously with the, you get the parents on board, the family on board, and generally speaking by that stage the parents probably had enough because the kids were out all night sniffing, and obviously they knew, the parents knew that sniffing petrol was bad for their, was bad for their health. And just to break that cycle, the elders would take them out to Mount Theo and do hunting, take them hunting. But also, I think they were developing a school at that point in time, getting funding to then educate them as well while they were there, rather than just sit around and do nothing.
And a relatively large number of community members were involved in setting up Mount Theo. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It was I think it was Peggy Brown's land, Mount Theo. It was her and some other family groups. That was their that was their country, and it was, from memory, it's about 130 kilometres in the Tanami Desert, so up towards the Western Australian border. So it was quite isolated. So they couldn't just walk back to Yuendamu. They needed to be driven in and out. So they bit like a camp, but it was an outstation prior to being a bit more of a developed place for them to dry out.
What other ways of disciplining kids did you observe in Yuendamu in the 1990s?
There was physical punishment of children. Never witnessed it myself, but Jabarula used to tell us if they were breaking into the shop, and that was, he said, that was one of the things I learnt, that that was how his culture, they dealt with misbehaving children, and also with adults there was the tribal payback. That was prevalent in the 90s as well, and still is today.
Were police ever involved in that, or you just...
We tried to keep away from the especially the tribal payback, because that can become problematic with us being seen to condone assaults. But it was one of those things where it was going to happen regardless. So you need to, and I know the clinic were front and centre with making sure that no one was seriously injured. But from a police perspective, we couldn't be seen to be condoning that, which we don't. But it's indigenous, that culture's been, that sort of thing's been going on for thousands of years. So who are we to not prevent it from happening, but stop it from happening when we knew it was going to happen, either out there or in Alice Springs.
Just to deal a little further with disciplined kids, lawful correction of a child is lawful in the Northern Territory within limits.
Yes, that's right.
Did you have a sense of whether or not kind of corporal discipline was effective in controlling kids in Yuendamu?
It was a mixture of the punishment, but also shame job. They didn't like to be shamed with the other families, and it brought shame to their family because every time there was a break-in at the shop, for instance, they'd close the shop, and the elders would round up the offenders and parade them in front of the community, get them to clean up what the mess they'd make, and shame them into, hopefully not committing further offences, because they were just basically breaking in to steal food, that sort of thing, food and drink.
Did you have a sense that young kids like that respected the elders when the elders said, this is the punishment? Or
Some did, but many didn't.
You've also served at least twice in Yuendamu. Is it more than twice?
As a relief.
I know you served in 1995 and in 2019.
Yes.
Have you served in Yuendamu at any other point in time?
May have been there at another relief capacity, so just for a few weeks.
Maybe you didn't serve there long enough on the latter occasions, but do you have any opinion on whether or not the ability of elders in a community like Yuendamu to discipline or control children has changed over time?
My experience has been that the elders have all yes, there is when an elder passes away, there's another elder that comes up, but those elders from when I was there in the 90s, they seem to be not there anymore. It's a different way of dealing with it, and sometimes they feel like they can't discipline the children, because then their families, their parents will get upset, and then community fighting starts because they feel like their kids are being picked on by the elders from another family group. So I think they feel a bit powerless.
Back in the 1990s, would many of the positions of responsibility in the community, like on the council, in the school, would they have been occupied by Aboriginal people?
Yeah, so they had a community. The structure of the council then was a town clerk who was a Caucasian person, but then under that was a community government council, so a group of elected elders within the community, and they would have like a council, a town council in, say, Alice Springs or any other place. So the town clerk, I suppose he was the business manager, and then they had a council president, and I suppose he'd be the what you would call the mayor, and they were all made up of Indigenous people, of local, like the elders and other people elected.
And that council made decisions about things of actual practical importance in the community.
Yep, so that every meeting, the sergeant would go to the meeting, the police sergeant at Yuendamu, and they'd discuss. He wouldn't be there, he or she wouldn't be there for the entire meeting, but there'd be a slot for the sergeant, and then they could discuss law and order issues and other issues that they thought the police could deal with. And that was usually once a month, I guess.
But they also made decisions about things like housing.
Yeah, so housing, they were had housing committees, so they would decide who gets what new house or that type of thing. So sometimes there were community arguments about that sort of those issues, but they decided all that sort of municipal undertakings.
But also things like if a window got smashed, the council had the infrastructure and skilled workmen, often Aboriginal workmen, who could go out and fix the window.
Yes. So there was when I was there was a position called an ESO, so it's the Essential Services Officer, and when I was there, he was Caucasian man, but he had Indigenous people working under him, and he was training them to fix the power station, the TV. So we had the TV was rebroadcast to the community. So if during the middle of the football the TV went off, then one of those workers would go and switch the satellite receiver dish back on and get the football up and running again. But there was also mechanics there. Had people working there, but it was a reasonably self-sufficient community back then, and I'm led to believe even years before I was there was a bakery and market gardens there, but they weren't in existence when I had moved there.
Correct. No, I'm not. The position is very different today.
Yes.
You'd be aware that in 2007, many of the Central Region local councils were amalgamated into what are now known as super shires.
I understand that was the case when I went back, but I don't know what year that was.
You're aware that many of those super shires now stretch, in the case of Yuendamu, from the Western Australian border all the way to the border with Queensland.
Yes, I'm aware there's some big big areas of land that they cover.
So whereas local Aboriginal people could make decisions that affected their community in 1995, now they are not responsible for making those same decisions in Yuendamu.
I don't think that's I think that's the case at the moment.
Do you think that the evidence that you gave about change in the levels of respect for elders in community might have something to do with the fact that those elders are no longer empowered to make meaningful decisions about the community?
I think that's got a lot to do with it, but also society, mobile phones and social media, YouTube, TikTok, the moving towards a more what you would call an American style society in a lot of these communities, where might be some just trying to think of the word. Can't think of the how to describe it, but it's moving away from culture, from that traditional culture, but you're right. The elders also probably are feeling a little bit disempowered because they don't have that local control as well.
Can I ask you some questions about arrests in community?
Yes.
Is there such a thing as a good and a bad arrest?
You probably need to provide a bit more context to that. A good arrest can be, you arrest someone for a murder at a murder scene. They've just committed a murder, perhaps, or shortly after a murder. So depends what you mean.
That's my fault. Are there particular times of day in community that you try to arrest people? Or does it make no difference?
It all depends on the person that you're trying to arrest. I've been involved in arrests where in the 90s when I was in Yuendamu, arresting a particularly violent offender, and we used an early morning arrest at his home, and while he was still in his swag, and handcuffed him straight away before he even had a chance to realise what was going on.
And what's the theory behind the removal?
Just the element of surprise and catching them off guard.
Are there other reasons why you try not to arrest people later in the day?
Again, it depends on who we are arresting. It can be that an arrest may take a prosecution file, if it's not already done, may take some time to do, and then that person ends up in the cells, in the watch house for a long period of time. They usually know when they're going to get bail, or if there's a presumption against bail or for bail. So you can plan the arrest if necessary, but at times there's no such ability to be able to plan for everything, and so it all depends on the situation.
What about the people you involve in arrests? Let's forget the urban context for a while and just focus on arrests in community.
Would you ordinarily try to involve an ACPO in the arrest of an Aboriginal person in the community?
If an ACPO was around, but it's not necessary all the time. We've got to be mindful of that person and their whether they know the family or have a poisoned cousin, or they just don't feel comfortable being part of the arrest because they don't want to be seen to be taking sides within a community. Yes, they've got a job to do, and they know that they have to try and do the job as best they can, as impartially as they can. But with Jabarula, I always used to ask him if he wanted to be part of an arrest, and it was up to him whether he would accept or not, and I would respect his wishes at all times.
So you kind of touched upon what might call conflicts or avoidance relationships.
Were there other reasons why you wouldn't always include an ACPO in an arrest?
If they're available, as I said before, it's managing their own fatigue as well. Jabarula, he lived in the community, and I've got no doubt that, I know for a fact, I had people knocking on his door sometimes at 2 and 3 in the morning, and wanted his assistance. So we may not have been aware of what was going on, or he had to go and stop a fight when he wasn't necessarily on duty. So he had to manage his fatigue levels, but also he had his other family at Nirrupi, so he would sometimes go there. So he wasn't in the community.
Would you ever involve family or elders in an arrest?
More so for youth. We would involve the elders in the arrest of a youth. People have a right to their privacy, so an offender we need to arrest because he's beating up his wife, committed assaults or what have you, they've got a level of privacy that we need to respect. So generally speaking, for adults, you wouldn't necessarily speak to the elders about it. And the other issue is that there's always that risk of the elders tipping off the family that we're trying to arrest a person.
Can I ask you some questions about your use of force now? Have you ever drawn your firearm?
Once, yes.
What were the circumstances?
My memory serves me correct. It was here in Alice Springs. I was probationary constable, and the senior partner I was working with, we were there was a group of perhaps 5 or 6 of us, including a couple of detectives, and we were assisting them in executing a search warrant for a handgun that was inside a house. And just before we entered the house, my senior partner said, draw your gun and put it at the guard position, so that's pointing down at the ground, because the offender was known to be armed with a handgun.
Have you ever been in situations where you've been, leaving the 6th of November to one side, but have you ever been in a situation where you've been presented with a weapon by someone?
Yes, several times, yes. Yep.
Edged weapons?
Yes, edged weapons, spears, a couple of spears, rocks. Had someone armed with a camshaft once, and star pickets, so star droppers, fencing posts.
Maybe it's difficult to answer the question collectively, but
Why didn't you draw your firearm?
On those occasions, I knew, after working there for some time, I knew that it was a show of force from their part, trying to show us that they're tough Walkley men, and generally speaking, these offenders were males, and brandishing a weapon is their way of saying that to you, that and also showing force, showing showing their family that they're also tough, and protecting their family.
So I take it that in order to make an appropriate decision about use of force, including the use of a firearm, you need to take into account all relevant circumstances.
Yes, whatever the weapon that's been presented, no one's ever pointed a gun at me. A gun would be a different response, but the weapons that had been in my career, they were, if utilised, would have been lethal, potentially, but they were never swung or thrown, or it was just in a threatening manner, just threatening that don't come any closer to me. And as I said, just showing their family that, and the rest of the community, that they're tough.
I suppose one of the circumstances on those occasions that you did take into account was the culture of the people you were dealing with.
Yes, and I knew that they didn't want to hurt me, and sometimes there was no other people around, so it was just us talking to them and saying, you don't want to be silly, you don't want to go to jail. But other times it was other family who were there, and telling them that you should put the weapon down, you're being silly. And they disarmed themselves or just ran away.
Do you think that it's essential that police officers who police in community have an awareness of the cultural identity of the people they're policing when making decisions about the use of force?
Yeah, it certainly helps, yes.
Have you ever drawn your taser?
No.
OC spray?
I've drawn it, but I haven't used it.
I'll ask you some questions now about Kumanjayi Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your first written statement, this is the 14th of November 2019, you said that you dealt with Kumanjayi on one prior occasion.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was an arrest with with Lanyon Smith and Layla Weathers.
Yes, that's right.
Now, can you remember the date of the arrest?
18th of March 2019.
Could it be the 19th of March?
19th of March, yes.
Pretty good memory.
Can you remember the time of day?
No.
Can you remember anything about the arrest?
I remember it's was really low key, and he complied with. I was outside, and Constable Weathers and Senior Constable Smith went inside the house. That had information that he was there, and I was just there to assist them if there was any problems.
And can you recall seeing them as they emerged from the house?
I can't remember, but I think they had him in handcuffs.
You certainly can't remember any violence or aggression.
No, and it was, as I said, it was an uneventful and incident-free arrest.
Did you have any other interactions with Kumanjayi Walker?
Not that I can recall, no.
I want to ask you some questions now about the lead up to the 9th of November. In your first recorded statement, Detective Sergeant Kieran Wells asked you to cast your mind back to the 6th of November, which is the day of the axe incident,
Yes.
and to provide a narrative from that point. And your response was,
Can I start a little bit earlier, because the week earlier was an important part of the context.
Yes.
on what way was the entirety of that week an important part of the context?
Just the level, the workload that we had. There was a football carnival at Nirrupi community. From memory, there was a couple of police officers stationed there from the Southern Region Support Unit, and I think there was some community fighting over that way before I had arrived. Senior ACPO Derek Williams and I travelled across there one of the days, and the workload then went into quite a bit of fatigue for some of us that were there.
And just to confirm, the two officers who were stationed at the FEMA station in Nirrupi were Mark Parks and Felix Alfaro?
No, I think it was they were at Harts. I think they were at Harts Bluff and then went to Nirrupi. But when I first got to Yuendamu, it was Senior Constable Sharp and another officer.
Now, on
The 4th of November, Sergeant Frost sent yourself and Derek Williams to Nirrupi.
Yes.
can you recall whether that was an eventful day, whether there were any arrests or?
No, it was a quite uneventful day. We drove around the community and made sure that the football games went off without a hitch and ensured there was no community disturbances.
The 5th of November, however, you described as a quote-unquote long day. Why was it a long day?
From memory, there was an arrest that the Nirrupi members had of a domestic violence offender, and that he got remanded into custody, and Derek and I had to transport him into Alice Springs.
So I'll just go through that in a little bit more detail. The 5th, you started at midday, is that right?
I think so, yes.
And would ordinarily have finished at 8 p.m. that day.
If it was an 8-hour shift, or at 2200 if it was a 10-hour shift. But
now, do the FEMA stations have computers?
yes, they do, but they run on a satellite system, so they're not fibre optic, so it's a slower system.
Okay.
Following the arrest, who ended up doing the paperwork for the prosecution file?
I think I did it.
Okay. At the Yuendamu police station.
Yes.
And then you did a halfway meet with the Nirrupi members to pick up the offender who was then in custody.
Yes, that's right.
And can you recall whether you drove them all the way into Alice Springs, or did you do a halfway meet?
I think we were supposed to do a halfway meet, and if my memory serves me correct, the police officers came from Alice Springs. They went to Papunya for some reason instead of coming and meeting us, and Derek and I ended up, by the time we figured out what was going wrong, we might as well go to town. So, and shouted in KFC when we got there.
That Derek or the man in custody?
No, Derek. Oh, he got some food as well.
Can you remember what time you knocked off on the 5th of November?
Be around midnight, 12:30.
Certainly, many hours after you would have finished.
Yes.
You just worked your normal roster.
Yes.
Is that normal for a community like Yuendamu to end up working 3, 4, 5 hours?
It can be, yes, it can be. Yuendamu is a quite a busy place, and a lot of competing priorities. But when people get remanded into custody, we have to take them, into Alice Springs before the next available court.
What was your level of awareness, if any, on 5th/6th of November, of the level of property offending that was going on in the community at that time?
Yeah, I heard that, and Yuendamu was always, even in the 90s, had a high level of property offending amongst the youth, and I had heard that there was some groups of youth going around breaking into houses, and both shops always get broken into.
Now, in your first recorded statement, you say that on the 6th you were called to duty at about midday. Does that sound right?
Yes.
And you describe most of the day as being uneventful.
Yes.
But at around about 5:45, you received a call on the main Yuendamu line that there'd been an unlawful entry at Luana Simmons' house. Do you recall
Yes, the clinic manager.
I missed that.
that? Luana Simmons is...
The clinic manager.
And you attended.
Yes, with Senior Constable Smith.
Where are the nurses' quarters or the health workers' quarters located in Yuendamu?
Where Luana is, I can't remember the name of that area, but there's sort of a row of houses some distance from the clinic, but they're the only ones that I were aware of.
What kind of state was Luana Simmons in when you arrived?
She was pretty distressed. She was, she said it was the first time that her house had been broken into in her time at Yuendamu, and I didn't know her that well, but she said that she was under the impression that it was a no-go zone for clinic houses to get broken into. That those houses shouldn't, that should be off limits from being broken into. But unfortunately, on this occasion, it had been broken into.
I think it's uncontroversial that at around 6:25 p.m. you then decided to go to house 577.
Yes.
I don't know if you know, but if you do know the identity of the person who provided the information to, please don't just
No, I don't.
say
Yep.
that person's name.
But did you have a conversation with Lanyon Smith about going to house 577?
Yes, we did.
And where did you have that conversation? Was it before you went to Luana Simmons or afterwards?
No, it was after.
Okay, so outside the house.
Yes.
Why did you decide to go then?
Senior Constable Smith told me he had some information from a community source that Kumanjayi was in the community, and Senior Constable Smith knows him quite well and knows of him being a prolific property offender. Now, we had no evidence that Kumanjayi broken into the house, but he is known to be a ringleader, if you will, of younger people on community, and get them to break into houses and the shop and steal on their behalf.
So just to clarify, the
Lawful authority for the arrest was the warrant that had been issued the day.
Yes, sorry. So yeah, there was a warrant in existence, warrant of apprehension. She had breached a court order, and I knew of its existence, and Senior Constable Smith knew where Kumanjayi may be, and that's when we went to House 577.
you thought,
Although it didn't rise to the level of providing an independent basis for an arrest, you wondered whether there might be a relationship between what had happened at Luana Simon's house and
That's right, and it's important to, if that was the case, that he was a ringleader, then it's my experience from when I was at Yuendamu in the 90s to get that ringleader out of the community, if we have obviously that a lawful reason to remove them from the community, and hope that that will prevent any further criminal offences. And I did process the scene at Luana Simon's house and develop a set of fingerprints, which I believe were...
can I just
Yep.
say that individual's name if you wouldn't mind?
I don't actually know that person's name.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there was some evidence from Senior Constable Smith about who that person was.
Right. Okay. I don't know that person's name.
Did you know, as you were having that conversation outside Luana Simon's house with Senior Constable Smith, that a funeral was then planned for the Friday?
No.
When did you find out about the funeral?
I think it was the Friday when Derek Williams wanted the day off.
Okay. And when did you find out that Derek Williams wanted the day off?
I think it was the third. It was the Thursday or the Friday. I can't be sure, but it wasn't. I didn't know about the funeral on the Wednesday.
Had you known about the funeral on Wednesday the 6th, would that have affected your decision to go to House 577?
No.
Would it have been relevant to the question of bail?
Most definitely. So, because it's a warrant of apprehension, that person is then entitled. We'd say to them, "Well, we need a bail review," and ring up the on-duty judge, and then ask them the question: "Do you want bail?" And if they say yes, I'd like bail, then we go to the judge, call up the judge, and ask them for bail for that person, depending on when the next Yuendamu court is, or if they want them to go into Alice Springs.
And if you knew that a funeral was on, would you relay that information to the on-call judge?
Certainly, and the judge will always ask to speak to the person that's applying for bail, and give them also the opportunity to tell them what's going on in their life, because we also do up a bail application sheet with all the details of their prior offending, and how many warrants that they've had, and that's a ready reckoner to when you're talking to the judge, as to help them make their decision as to whether they get bail or not.
Did yourself and Senior Constable Smith discuss what you were actually going to do at House 577? By that I mean, did you discuss how you were going to effect the arrest?
No. Senior Constable Smith knows Kumanjayi quite well at that point, and he's a senior police officer, so if there were any issues with violent offending against police, then I'd expect Senior Constable Smith to advise me of that. But that day it was classed it as a low level arrest.
Can you perhaps just tell me free recall of what happened when you arrived at 577?
Yeah, so from memory, I was driving the police vehicle, and we arrived out the front of 577, and I let Senior Constable Smith take the lead, because he knows the house quite well and the occupants very well. And the door is open, and there's a man inside the door I know to be Ethan Robertson, and Senior Constable Smith asks him where Kumanjayi is, and Ethan points to the back of the house, and Senior Constable Smith, he said that's where he's that's where he sleeps, or that's Rakisha's room, and he's located Kumanjayi there before in that room, so he knew where to go. And then he approached the door that was locked. Actually, I don't know if it's locked, but he knocked on the door. It was shut. He knocked on the door a couple of times, and a person, I didn't know at the time who Rakisha was, but obviously do know now, and she opened the door, and then there was a conversation, which Senior Constable Smith shone his torch inside, and I did as well, because the room was in darkness, and I didn't know where the light switch was, and Kumanjayi was laying on a bed at the back of the room, had headphones in his ears, and Rakisha was blocking our path inside the room, so trying to get her to move out the way, and she was in a mixture of language, Walpi language and English, telling him to go out the window. So I could hear the word window, window, window. Anyway, Kumanjayi came up from the bed, and I can't remember if it was myself or Senior Constable Smith. Actually, it might have been myself. Told we want to put handcuffs on him, and he said he wanted to talk to Lottie Robertson, his grandmother, and I said no, we'll put handcuffs on you first, and then you can go and talk to Lottie. And all the while, Rakisha was still blocking our path, and I said to Rakisha, "You're going to have to get out the way," and she didn't. And then I moved her out of my way so we could get to get inside the room. I didn't want to manhandle her or physically move her, because that's can be quite disrespectful, because I'm male and she's a female, but also we also needed to get inside the room because Kumanjayi was there, and as I just moved her to the side, she cried out for her mum, I believe, and that got Kumanjayi angry, and he said words to the effect of "You fucking hurt my wife," and could hear a clinking sound of something hitting the concrete floor, and that's when, with our torches, we could see, and our eyes had also adjusted to the darkness a little bit, but Kumanjayi was holding a hatchet or a small axe above his head. So it all happened very, very quickly, and we retreated out of the room, and I lost sight of Senior Constable Smith, and I moved out into the, I call it a lounge area. I think it was a lounge area, and Kumanjayi still had the axe and was holding it above his head in a threatening manner. He didn't swing it at us. He had plenty of opportunity to hit us with the axe, but as I said before, you know, that's the period where, although initially I thought to myself might be in a bit of trouble, but that was a split second thought, and then I knew that he wasn't going to use it on us, and I moved out the way, and he gave him a path to go to the door, but then he stopped at the door, and I do recall grabbing his left arm, but I still knew that he had the axe in his right arm, in his right hand, sorry, and that he could have swung it, but because I didn't have the side of his right arm, so I made the decision to release my grasp, and he was struggling anyway, and then he ran out the door and dropped the axe on the veranda, and I gave chase.
Mark, was you there? Your Honour, witness has been locked for almost an hour and a half. Now,
Yes,
doing your time.
it is. Intact.